Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the strategic session Financial Tools in Railway Projects, How to Spend and Not Lose. The strategic session moderator will be General Director of Joint Stock Company IC Russian Railways Invest, Ivan Grigorovich. Hello. And should I invite other speakers, or who should do that? I would ask to this stage participants of our session, that is Vadim Mikhaylov, First Deputy Managing Director of Russian Railways, Albert Eganyan, CEO InfraOne, Irina Olkhovskaya, Director of Seaport and Railway Project, UMMC, Limberger, CEO Silver Air Capital Group, Dmitry Snesar, Senior Vice President VTB Bank, Irina Lolua, Executive Director JP Morgan in Russia, Dmitry Kovalev, Partner, CIS Infrastructure and Project Finance Leader, EY, and Lloyd Tobias, Acting Chief Executive, Transnet Freight Rail. Also, we have two participants in the discussion in the room, Fyodor Vistolkin and Pavel Chistikov, Infrastructure Economic Center. Today, in the plenary session, we discussed the importance of rail infrastructure, and it is known that the world is changing a lot, and we are on the verge of global change, digital era, but no one cancelled physical infrastructure. So you need wires to transmit a signal, you need seaports, railways, motorways for transporting your cargo. So it is important to create such infrastructure, and in the nearest time we'll still have to deal with that. In order to construct and develop this infrastructure, we need money. And now we would like to speak about the possibilities, about the sources and investor pools and opportunities for inviting capitals both inside the country and from abroad. And I would like to start with this session with a question on physical infrastructure rather than money. So in order to take part in this questionnaire, please scan the QR code that will appear on the screen. Scan it with your smartphone camera and select your answer to the question: what areas of Russian railways should be financed in the first place? That is, traction rolling stock, long distance infrastructure, approaches to handling hubs, or eliminating bottlenecks. Please project this QR code to the screen for the moderator and for the speakers, I mean. No way? So we'll have to skip that. We'll only be able to look at the results. We have about 30-40 seconds for voting, and in 10 seconds we'll see the results in the screen. So can we have the results? Okay, here we go. Long distance infrastructure is leading. The next one is bottlenecks, approaches to large hubs, and new rolling stock. I would like to outline the format of our event today. We'll have 3 to 5 minutes for every speaker, and then there will be a question from me to develop the topic you touched upon. I would ask you to comply with the timelines and respect other speakers, because we want everyone to have enough time. And in the end, we'll have a final vote on financial instruments. Mr. Mikhaylov, according to the data that I have for Q1 of this year, the international portfolio of Russian Railways is about 6 billion euro. Also, British pounds and other currencies. So as borrower, Russian Railways is quite famous in the international markets. Also inside the country, there are large concession projects that were concluded last year. So all of that is also Russian Railways. So Russian Railways can borrow from domestic market as well. So what do you think? Russian Railways, as a key driver or key owner of the infrastructure in Russia, what's their position? Is it stable? And what's the role of Russian Railways in Russian economy? Hello, dear participants of the discussion. I would like to say, so for the moment, the role of Keynesian theory is now smoothed. There are a lot of new economic theories, but no one canceled the point that investment in infrastructure heats up the economy. So this point is quite profound, and there are a lot of good examples when investment into infrastructure really heated up economy. For example, in Germany at the time. So we think that we need to develop our infrastructure in advance. As you know, on the 19th of March this year, Russian government approved of a long-term program for the company development till the year of 2025. In the framework of this program, apart from own investment funds, there are also 4 trillion rubles of investors, third parties. So we think that this proportion between own funds and other funds can help us to resolve the tasks that were set by Mr. Putin, by the government, in the May decrees on the infrastructure development. And as you fairly noted in your speech, Russian Railways has a long-term program and already started certain concession projects. And a good example of such a project is the northern route, also a line between Kyzyl-Kuragino. Here we face an issue. As in any concession project which is large enough, an issue when a limited number of companies are ready to become general contractors. So, despite that the practice of this kind of project is quite popular abroad, but inside Russia we still have to tackle it. Also, we have projects with the regions, and I would like to note that we have quite successful projects, at least 2 of them, regional concessions with the Kaluga and Samara regions. Concessions aimed at creating infrastructure for special economic zones here. So residents of those economic zones will improve their production facilities. And we have good perspectives for upscaling this experience. So we have large-scale projects, we have regional projects, and also I would like to note that, for example, we also have special project companies. These successful projects are Sukhadol port construction in the Far East, a port in Murmansk region, and development of a deposit in Caucasia. And the last but not least is the project in passenger transportation. We have good experience of interaction with the government of Moscow. Now we are getting ready for St. Petersburg and Samara. As for your question regarding financing and instruments, indeed, Russian railways all along, since they became a joint stock company, they started pioneering in their field. And for example, now we are elaborating on bonds with no term, and we were among the first ones, together with our colleagues from VTB, who launched long-term bonds. And I would also note that starting from this year, we were quite proactive with ruble bonds abroad, which is quite an unusual instrument. For example, in April this year, we did 20 billion for 6.5 years with 8.8 per annum. And in the plenary session, that was underlined that railway transport is one of the most environmentally friendly ones. And we also issued Euro bonds with 2.2 per annum, which is a record in the history of Russia, both for sovereign debt and private investors. Also in September, we launched an interesting project. It was also a record, 6-year bonds with a range of interest rates. We are competing in the capital market, as you know, because you know all these events in the capital markets, geopolitical activities and demand both inside the country and outside. These resources are quite substantial, so it also depends on how you structure your projects. And when you do not structure the projects in the right way, then it's an issue. But if your projects are well structured, if you have good plans for attracting money from abroad, if you can replace something that you have in your long-term development and finance it with cheap money and invest and contribute to the economy development of the Russian Federation and the increase of its GDP. Thank you.
Vadim, what about competition on behalf of other participants of the transport market, the holders of projects in development of airports and ports and road construction? Do you feel this competition, or do you ignore it and just the Russian railways proceeds with no reference to competition? One would be very too ambitious to say that there is no competition. Well, of course, we do have the competition and we see it, but on the other hand, our credit worthiness and our history allows us to use the popularity, and even during the road shows, we answer easily the questions, what is the horizon of the loans and so on. And the potential investors are interested in specific parameters and not our credit history or any other features of competition and competitiveness. So in short, we stand out among all the competitors, but this is due to the management of our costs. We cut down costs, we develop new projects, we develop logistics at the highest standard. So we try to proceed ahead of our competitors, and no matter what happens in the market, there will be always a fight for cheaper money, for better terms, and we are ready for that. Thank you very much. Albert, a question to you. Let us talk about Russian railways as a competitor in the competitive market. What do you think about the Russian railways as the holder of big infrastructure development projects, and what should be recommended in terms of future projects? Thank you very much. I will answer very shortly. I see Russian railways as a quite sound player, but in more detail, I would say that we should speak about railway industry at large, and what Valery has just said is absolutely right, I think. So when we speak about competition, the competition is for funds, for capitals, but there is also competition which is the other way around, when capital competes for the quality projects. So the challenge set for Russian railways industry at large, and not only the company Russian Railways, but to every player in the market, the challenge is to find a balance between tough competition but also have the freedom to use some non-conventional projects, non-conventional funding, which would lead us to the profitable status in the market. Over 2 years, the number of projects that were closed down in railway industry, which was to the amount of 500 million rubles. These were the projects of constructing access to ports and new infrastructure of the ports and so on. So this was the volume which was realized, 500 million rubles. But is it a limit? Well, when we look at the direction of the banking sector, they are ready on the annual basis, and the central bank gives us these numbers, but other banks give us other estimations, but they think that the capacity is 800 million rubles. So this is the funds volume available for financing projects. As for railway experts, there has always been the opinion that it is not possible to develop concessions in the main lines development. But then there was a special program adopted, and the concessions were mentioned as the target objective of the projects, and not a single change in the legislation happened. So the legislation was ready to give the way to concessions. Another project is the railway operations in a seaport, which was started from the scratch, from the zero level. Some say it is not possible to make the participation of in the project that would be targeting operations of railways in the seaport. But in half a year, reality shows that nothing needs to be done, especially for creating this opportunity. Such projects do exist and develop. Another question is it possible to fund the concessions in the main line development. Yes, it is possible. The question is off-takers contracts. If the contracts are for handling cargo and for transportation at large, no. But if we think about resolution of certain issues in bottlenecks operations, yes, there is a chance to develop this. So such different projects are possible. Another question is, if it is possible to use the traffic bonds where the movement of cargo from A to B needs certain investment. So when we consider the experience of motorway transportation, such projects do exist, and central bank is ready to issue bonds for development of similar approaches in railways operation. So we can find similarities across different sectors of transport industry. But we have to recognize that for a long time we have been living under the linear operation, and now we think that there can be diversification or some more non-conventional approaches that allow to redistribute risks and to minimize regress and to raise funds for project finance. And over 15 years we have wasted time instead of developing these skills. And when we look at statistics abroad, we get convinced that their project-based funds financing from 200 billion euros has increased to 1 trillion billions, while we are only starting such project finance approaches. So to conclude, I would say the Russian Railways Company wouldn't be able to be alone in introducing a scope of important projects. So, because these projects need involvement of lots of stakeholders, some acting as contractors, some as manufacturers, some as suppliers, and some as participants of some joint associations. And only in such a way we can distribute risks. And thus, Russian Railways Company can conduct marketing of a project, but without a big list of participants of the project. Not a single mono project could be carried out by the Russian Railways Company alone. Otherwise, there would be too much risk for the company, and the outcomes of the projects will not be bright. So from 0 to 500 million rubles. This is the scope of the work conducted on the project basis by the Russian Railways Company, practically alone. Of course, this was a goodwill which served good and provided benefits to cooperation with Gazprom, and though previously it was not considered possible. And from telecom industry, again, the telecom networks can benefit from cooperation with the Russian Railways. So having implemented these projects to the volume of 500 million rubles, now the Russian Railways Company is looking ahead to more cooperation. The door is open, the gate is open for different stakeholders, but the requirements set for such projects are growing in terms of the speed of operations and distance and so on. So am I right in understanding that the Russian Railways has woken up the beast, which will now dictate the market reality? Well, when we look at that. Somebody has jumped on the bull abroad, and then after riding this bull, faced the challenge of remaining on this bull. So in a similar way, the Russian Railways company, having implemented the scope of projects, now needs to maintain its position. Thank you very much.
Now I give the floor to Irina Olkhovskaya, who participated in one of the projects Albert described, that Seaport and Railway project. What do you think? Contribution of Russian Railways to this kind of project, apart from infrastructure itself, financially, is it appropriate? Is it interesting? Thank you for the question, dear colleagues. Hello. It's a very nice session. If I may, I would like to continue the idea of Mr. Mikhaylov that investment into infrastructure heat up the economy. But now we see the world practices that we started using. We've been discussing it a lot. How Indian economy was heated up by the infrastructural investment, how their metallurgical industry improved and they increased supplies of coal, etc. And now we are inviting Indian colleagues to us to have a look at the Vostochny port, and the heads of states are talking, and then it goes down to us. As for investment, indeed, there are two kind of types of investment. The first one, which was in 2010, 2018, and a kind of new structure that we observe now, Sukhadol project and other new projects like that. In order to attract new investment for Russian railways and private investors, you need to show certain attitude to these projects, because those new stakeholders with good competencies, they've implemented several projects already. For example, Vostochny Port joint stock company. It is about reinvesting your profits. It's a 40 billion rubles project which combines seaport and railway infrastructure investments. So you really need to care for the investments you've already implemented, and you really need to keep the promises you gave to the government. And using investment slang, you should be a positive story, positive history for those investments. And they need to show that it is possible to invest into other neighboring industries. And this will help us to structure our projects differently, because it was noted that we do not have enough of well-structured projects. Previously, for example, I was the only shareholder and the only investor, but now we are looking for immaculate investors whom we can trust. And at certain stages we look not at the project but at the investors, and if this investor's rating is quite high, this means that they will be able to provide funds. The next condition that we need is the presence of private investors in the projects which are also reliable. And if we look at the Sukhadol project, that's just a coal company and Russian railways. Lavna is not only coal companies, but these are Russian railways and state transport leasing company and others. So this is more difficult to structure as an investment project, and implementation of this project as any port project depends upon synchronization of the Russian railways development and approaches to the ports. So this is all interrelated, and it involves not only Russian railways investment but also those private investments. So of course it's a great positive role of Russian railways that Immaculate investor in a well-structured project. What's your opinion? Those plans regarding long-distance network, which are in the long-term program. You in the Far East, do you think that it's enough? What's planned for your full-fledged work of your port? That's a very disputable question, if I am allowed to take it. Well, because we are speaking about investment, not construction. So enough of investment, it's something you assess. And we have new projects both in the West and in the East, and the more projects we have, the better it is for the market. Competition is high, and competition is always good for the economy. So it's all about attitude to your investment when you care about the funds you are using. So if you implemented, for example, a project in the East or in the West, but for me, of course, the Vostochny port is of great interest. We really need to have a positive history for investments to come. We need more reliable investors. And in the Northwest, that's Lavna and other projects. Thank you.
Floor.
I would like to give the floor to Thomas Limberger. Please, could you dwell on the key trends and challenges that you see in the Eurozone economy and infrastructure, and also the project which was mentioned in the morning, the larger gauge as far as Vienna?
Thank you for the question and thank you for the invitation. I would like to open with a couple of words of Mr. Belozorov this morning, who said global economy and trade don't know any boundaries or borders. That is actually true due to the fact that, especially in rail infrastructure, there needs to be an interconnectivity between countries, and therefore a stronger focus needs to be laid upon political networks, legislation, speed of realizing projects based on these legislations. So it is clear, on my slide you see, it is clear that rail infrastructure, and we heard this throughout the morning, is a driver for economic growth. There is an enhanced look at reinvigorating the European rail infrastructure, and that means actually interconnectivity towards Russia/Far East. The rail infrastructure offers a very fast, still not cost-effective on the long haul, but very fast transport means towards Europe and from Europe to Asia. But the cost effectiveness, I think we're currently working on by making technology greener, trying to basically eliminate as much touch points as we can is a very important factor. And as I said, greener is a very important factor. RZD has shown outside, but also, again, this morning, we've heard from a lot of participants that RZD is at the forefront of having the, let's say, the greenest transport company in the world. And especially for Europe and the discussions on putting more on rail, green aspect or the ecological aspect is very, very important. So therefore, the shift to on-rail transportation is there, and the need for projects is there. Why is it not happening as fast as it may seem, or as everybody logically would say? is because, as you can see, traditional infrastructure in Europe has been financed by the governments. Mainly, we are looking in most of the countries at a huge public deficit and increased public debt to GDP ratios. And we have seen over the years a inability of a lot of European governments to basically transform the projects into an efficient investment scheme, which results, and these are current data from the World Bank, in an investment gap of a substantial amount of billions of euros. Theoretically, the EU has to spend around 4.7% of its GDP in infrastructure investments. And currently, as you can see, we're only spending on average about 1.8% of GDP in infrastructure investments. So the gap is widening by the year, and in numbers, we're looking at a infrastructure gap in transport or investment gap in transport of 2.4 billion per year, and 2,400 billion euros per year, and in Europe alone of 160 billion euros per year. So that actually tells a story that we're really lagging behind in infrastructure spending from a European government side, which actually calls for something which we need to, which we've discussed already a couple of times during the conference, is private investment. Private investment is, next slide doesn't show. Well, anyway, private investment, has different theoretical levers, as you can see here. RZD, as you heard from Mr. Mikhaylov, is at the forefront of tapping into these private markets as a national company, which I think is, again, next to the eco-friendly aspect, a highlight of the company. But most of its European competitors actually haven't really figured out that kind of road to getting public or getting private funds into a public company. Therefore, it is of utmost importance that we educate by having role models like RZD, educate companies around Europe on tapping into private investment funds in order to finance the infrastructure they need, and in order to actually finance also the gaps of infrastructure they need. And as you can see, the gaps are widening by the year, and there's an enhanced capital need for infrastructure investments, especially in the connectivity between the Russian corridor and then the European rail network. The project which was shown this morning by Mr. Belozerov, which we think is a lighthouse project in this endeavor, is the 1520 Eurasian rail corridor, connecting the Russian corridor to the European corridor, and actually building at the end a two cargo hub offloading alternative, which is Bratislava and Vienna. And here, with the great support and help of RZD and the push, and here maybe I'd use your analogy, here RZD is not facing the beast, actually is riding the beast. It is really has tamed the possibilities which were not seen by European governments, and actually has introduced a private investment scheme towards this idea, which was started about 10 years ago. And this idea basically translates today into a private fund which is raising money at the capital markets globally in order to finance the last, let's say, 450 kilometers between Košice and Vienna, including the cargo hubs, and supported by the governments and supported by the rail companies, by the local rail companies, and therefore achieving something which I think is at the core of what we heard throughout the day, faster delivery times, lower cost, or being more cost efficient, but also being greener, more environmental friendly, and actually in totality reducing cost to society, because that's what we're talking about at the end. Do you want to give this cost away to the taxpayer, or do you want to somehow use the mechanisms available in the global markets? And the answer clearly is, since the taxpayer is not willing to finance these projects anymore, you need to look for alternatives. The alternatives are there. They're very easy. They're easy to structure. It's not rocket science to actually raise a fund for an infrastructure investment, because most of the investment community understand infrastructure investment. It's a long-term project. It has certain risks, but it has also certain rewards. And that's what institutional investors are looking for. So in a nutshell, it is, we really need to call for, and again, Mr. Mikhaylov has clearly shown that RZD is at the forefront. We need to call for private investment in semi-government driven infrastructure projects, and need to transfer these ideas into reality, and much quicker than a government can do. And I think this is the role we see each other in, and this role is clearly supported by RZD and its partners.
У меня тогда вопрос. Насколько...
Then I have a question. To which extent do the projects that are cross-border and even transnational in their potential would be presented to buyers internationally? To which extent will it be easier to present it to global players rather than to domestic players, investors, I mean? So we speak about the projects that will involve lots of countries, like this big road transpassing lots of countries. Will the hunger of international investors be higher than the hunger of domestic investors?
Generally, I think the short answer is yes. Why? When you look at so-called dry powder for infrastructure investment globally, we're looking currently at a number of around, according to the latest studies, around 180 billion US dollars uninvested, which are earmarked for infrastructure investment globally. So that basically means the big institutional investors have earmarked a lot of capital for these kinds of projects, but there's no project. So at the moment there is more money available than projects. So therefore, coming back to the 1520 ERC project, we see a huge opportunity for us and a window of opportunity to actually jump on this dry powder or this unused capital in order to deploy this into a project like this, since this could be one of the lighthouse projects for Europe and sort of like a benchmark of projects to come. Yes, the international community is ready for it. They're waiting for it. The problem mainly from experience in this project was to jump over the political hurdles. That is, I think, still today the main issue, to make people in different countries understand that macroeconomically there is a benefit to everybody if you build a project from X to Y through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries. And therefore, the push from our side towards having a privately financed vehicle to make this reality has been strong. It has been understood by the governments, and we now at the stage of hopefully going into implementation, i.e. funding, and from that point on, structurally, it is, as I said, not rocket science to build a fund, structure a fund, get it certified, and then actually start kicking off the investment.
Спасибо большое. Теперь Дмитрий Николаевич.
Thank you very much.
Now I have a question to Mr. Snesar or Mr. Kovalev. So let's talk about Russian projects, Russian grounds. So what about VTB investment into Russian railways projects, other railway projects? Is the industry ready for using funds like that with your participation. I have a small presentation, but the vector of our discussion is a bit displaced. Could you please put my slides on? I'm not exactly going to follow my presentation, but I have several slides which will be quite representative. If we look at the world and investment into railways, states participate in this investment to a very small extent. Well, governments do invest, but if a country is well developed or not so well developed, they invest more or less. If we speak specifically about Russian railways, and if they are ready for that new stage of investment, I think this question is not to the Russian railways, but to the government, who needs to decide what we want. My personal opinion is that we are quite modest in investing into infrastructure. For years, we are discussing this or that initiative or project, and eventually we do something, but with a great delay. I used to work with Deutsche Bahn, and 12 years ago they've been discussing a project between two capitals, and finally they commissioned the last section. Now I have this road, and as a consumer I'm extremely happy, but we want it to happen faster. So accordingly, working with the Deutsche Bank, we were trying to find investors for Russian infrastructure, and looking at similar scenarios in different countries. Russia was very similar to Spain after Franco's regime. Now look at Spain 3 years later. Spain, from a country that had a very underdeveloped infrastructure, became one of the world leaders, or a European leader for sure, with good motorways, with excellent railways, seaports, airports, railway stations. And most of that was done with private-public partnerships and private capital. Why should we reinvent a wheel? Because we know what can be done. Unfortunately, in Russia, regulator is a bit afraid of investing into infrastructure. Next slide. Yes, this one. I wanted to demonstrate it to you. Please look at those pension accumulations and savings that could participate in supporting our infrastructure construction. But now central bank is afraid of using this money as investment money. But despite that, fortunately we have capital in the country, and if we look at state banks and their role, like VTB, Gazprombank, Sberbank, we participate quite proactively in a lot of infrastructural projects. Next. So these are several projects where we participated both as concessionaire and investor. Of course, there is competition for capitals, but there's a lot more competition for quality projects. If we look at Pulkovo, a port of St. Petersburg, there partially we left that nice company, and what they paid was more than 12%, and that was a fight, I should say. And Russia, fortunately or unfortunately now, is a country where we do not have enough of an institutional project. And if tomorrow we see a good quality project, there will be a line of banks, and not only Russian banks. Also would like to mention a role of investment fund specialized in infrastructure. Now their activity decreased a lot because now we are under sanctions. But even now we see the interest from these kind of people. That would be it. Thanks a lot. And now let's get back to green bonds. And as far as I know, in 2018 there were about 200 billion US dollars issued of such bonds, 320 emittents from 44 countries. So the rest of the market outside dollar market is not that large, and now I have a ruble emittent, Russian Railways. So what's so brilliant was offered that the market trusted it and bought it.
Thank you very much. It's an interesting question. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a wonderful forum and a wonderful place. And if you allow me, I will just say compliments to Sochi, some infrastructure, including railway transport infrastructure. So when I was arriving from Moscow to Sochi, I was thinking, well, we have so much built here for the Olympic Games, and now we have the new railway lines and Lastочка trains, and I recognized for myself that one can perform and deliver objectives nicely, but some can deliver them impeccably, and impeccably is the word which I would like to apply when talking about best practices in issuing the green bonds. So, some history and some definitions. Green bonds are a part of a wonderful socially responsible investment, a part of sustainable development practices, and more frequently I hear investors' opinion that when by certain parameters we judge about emittents and so on, so they ask us, and where you are, your company, how responsible socially your company is. Can you give examples of any products or projects and such and such and such? Green boards belong to the segment of a wonderful area of sustainable economy, sustainable development, and about 10 years ago the first emittents were the international banks of development. So the green bonds are different from other instruments by the following: the volume of money available from investors is channeled into development of environmentally clean technologies in power generation and many other things, water treatment. So the objectives are clear, the process is transparent, the parameters are defined, and in this we can draw the line to what we have managed to achieve. On the 2nd of May, the horizon of the newborns was 8 years, which is a remarkable emission of bonds, innovative in Russia. This is the first case in Russia that green bonds are issued, and I know that it was publicly announced by other stakeholders who also want to issue green bonds. But on the other hand, in Russian realities, these bonds can be placed in a great number of opportunities. Most of emittents belong to the power generation industry, and the success of such projects depends on the quality of planning and structuring of such projects. So majority of such projects are in the green power supply, As for transport industry, so this is more complicated, but nevertheless, in the international markets, there are innovative projects for example, Eurostat. And on the one hand, this green bonds is a good contribution into environment, or protection of environment. On the other hand, so the interest rate at the level of 2.2% was the lowest, and it's also interesting. So why it is attractive? Because it is interesting, because it is socially responsible, and because we have demand for 1.7 million and about 400 million euros abroad. So this is the milestone. I mean, right now, this momentum we can really develop, and about 1/4 of investors today are the investors who buy green bonds or invest into green economy. What is in future? The Russian railways have been the pioneer, but other stakeholders also follow. Even Moscow's exchange also develop a special department in charge of similar bonds. And for us, it is a great honor to be the pioneers. So once again, the Russian Railways Company is a nice breaker here as well. So breaking the ice, and others will follow, right? Absolutely. As I said, the number of corporations, stakeholders, they also want. But some wish they could also start such projects, but it takes lots of efforts, because, as I said, the planning, the structuring of this project is very important. Like, for example, Lastочка trains. On the one hand, they are quite efficient from the point of view of operation, but also they are cost effective, and on top of that, they are greener. So the step of approval is the stamp of approval is something which we can attach to such projects, and the international rating agency will rank them higher. Like the Russian Railways Company has got some additional scores in the ratings just due to this great work carried out in eco-friendly approaches. Thank you very much. I would like now to give the floor for further to Solkin to speak about the trans-border investment, Russian companies investing abroad and foreign companies importing in Russia. Could I please ask to give him the microphone?
Ну или на сцену, да, можно выйти.
Or you can come up here. So microphone is faster, okay? Regarding foreigners in Russia, of course, what's important for them, there's a stable national market. If there's a stable national market with players and strong projects which are interesting for investment, this attracts foreign investors. I agree with the speakers. And currently it seems that potentially available capital in Russia is larger than the number of projects that are ready for investment. Nevertheless, foreign participation has certain positive effects apart from finance. First, we have certain issues with equity. We have a lot of debt in the market, and we have issues with equity, and you can look at the neighboring transport industries, issues with roads and airports, etc. Foreign participation usually improve the credit and documentary quality of the project, and sovereign funds of different states, what's now actively used in Russia, it is very good also for national participants. And finally, we all believe that the pipeline is going to grow, and we are on the verge of very capital consuming projects where we cannot do without foreign investment and foreign technology. And in general, it refers to motorways as well. So we just hope that the pipeline will be such that we'll be finally depleting the national market and will need borrowings. Working a lot with foreign investment, we as a company see that despite difficult external conditions, in the infrastructure, things are not that bad. It was mentioned already today. I mean, the deals like 8 or 10 years ago, that's Western Diameter and Pulkovo, where foreign investors already participated in the construction. Then there was a break for several years and foreigners only participated in the secondary market, buying ready projects. And this year, from our practice, we see that foreigners are now participating in the deals. For example, road construction around Moscow, and there foreign investments join at the construction stage, which is good. From the legislation standpoint, which is much closer for me personally, I would like to note that we have actually good conditions. And foreign participants are often surprised about the risk distributions in the deal offered by the state and what instruments are going to be used by the state to cover those risks. And very often it's much better than in other jurisdictions, especially which refers to termination, and Russian concession practice is quite attractive. So I'm looking quite optimistically at foreigners in Russia and their role. Thanks a lot. And now a question to Pavel Chistякov. We said that there's a lot of money, and as for the long-term program of Russian railways, we have enough of money and projects. But speaking about the horizon of 2030 and beyond, what can you say about the demand for the infrastructural investment? Thank you, Mr. Grigorovich. I would like to say that when we were developing the structure for 2018-2024, the indicator for the infrastructural investment was 0.7% of GDP, and now the government says it's 0.5 GDP, so it's a bit down. So the example of Spain is rather negative, because Spain is 100% of debt to the GDP. It's a very low microeconomic stability, and we still have the possibility to increase the debt, and I hope this is going to happen. And if we invest up to 0.7% of GDP, and in the next stage, after 2030, we could invest 10 trillion. That's an important amount, because this will allow us to preserve at the same level, in percentage, investment to the east field, east polygon, because we need to get to Nakhodka hub, to the Far East. That's huge investment. Now we have 10% of all investment in Moscow transport. And here we still have potential for passenger transportation. Finally, the SM share should grow to the maximum extent from 4%, from 200 billion to like 2 trillion. And what's important, and huge growth to be expected, this is what we can call digitalization. I think like intervals of 2 minutes in Moscow, interval of 9 minutes in Irkutsk, Sludanka. This is the aim for the next period of development in Russian railways. So as for the instruments, which Albert did not mention, First of all, these are PPPs in the existing infrastructure. Currently, all of them are new projects, but we think there should be an investment tariff, something more subtle, some adjustment of how private investors can get a guarantee revenue, can be guaranteed revenues on their investment, return on investment. Also, we should not forget venture financing. The future role in the next 7 years will be very important and will be attached to the digitalization processes and will need to involve private capital for investment venture projects. Thank you a lot, Pavel. And now let's give the floor to Dmitry Kovalev.
Okay, I'm ready. Could you please answer? Those instruments that we have discussed above still do not exhaust the entire scope of instruments. So what else can be offered to the market, in your opinion? The market in which the Russian Railways company is as a loaner, and what other instruments are available? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be here to answer your question. I understand I don't have much time, but I will talk about instruments that are potentially available or could be used in the Russian Federation. Russia, in the opinion of a number of well-known analysts, by the year 2030 will have the impact into the world economy, will have a substantial impact, and will be on the top list of top 10 economies in the world, which means that our breakthrough in many parameters will happen. On the one hand, this is our liability. On the other hand, this is our right. And I would compare this not with developed mega economies like the United States or perhaps developing China, or somebody mentioned Spain, but let us compare with Indonesia as an example, because it's also the country which is developing. The currency is not the American dollar. They have their national currency, so there are certain complications associated with that and limitations. And here we can say that this case prompts that we need more trust to our legislation inside of the country. We have to rely on it. And when we speak about instruments, then what is available? The green bonds, but also the traffic of bonds, revenue bonds. In this part, the name of the Russian Railways company is an absolute guarantee for the investors' interest because of the reputation of the company. So when we speak about new instruments that are offered in association with the Russian Railways, so there is a great chance that many investors will look with an interest whatever instrument is associated with Russian Railways. So another thing is the securities issued for the property or assets generated by the projects, which is secure and risk-free for the issuing company, but for investors perhaps not that attractive, because investors look for higher profits. But when you mentioned attraction of money from abroad, well, whether we borrow money from the right pocket or the left pocket of our own country, it is still domestic. But when we borrow from abroad without the role of the state hedging, this shift would not be impressive. Over recent years, even those foreign companies with whom we operated and observed has increased threefold. And we speak about investors not only in West but also in the East. But many investors turn back and go away if they are not promised hedging at least by 50% by the state. So the state needs to protect the investment and promise to mitigate the risk by 50% in case of some adverse situations. So without the state, it would be next to impossible, even for the Russian Railways company or any other major player, to expect a breakthrough. We see the limitations of the existing budget from the state, which is funded mostly which is associated with selling for currency. So the state is interested in currency, but then the state needs to protect this. And on the other hand, the social bonds, they were mentioned in passing, but these are different because they are issued either by the states or some federations. And if the mechanism needs to be explained, so the horizon for such instruments is not 1 year, not 2 years, but 5-year loans or bonds or some other forms of investment. And I'm afraid that the market will not appreciate it because our developments are long-term. Our market is not ready to comply with expectation of profits in 5-year time. So you mean that perhaps for next meeting we should invite somebody from the Ministry of Finance so that they would guarantee us that they would hedge the currency loans or investment. Thank you very much. And the question is to Lloyd Tobias. Can you please name the top instrument of financing which you as an expert could recommend, or if not recommend, but foresee as an important and possible tool in funding the infrastructure projects?
Now, thank you for, first of all, the invitation, and congratulations on hosting a successful Russia-Africa summit. Everybody's left and they left me behind. I just want to talk from an African point of view. You know, obviously, President Putin has said that the $20 billion trade that's with Africa is not enough. So there's an opportunity, I think, in Africa. Now, I come from a company called Transnet, which is the biggest railway in Africa. Just to give you the size of it, we have 8 commercial ports. Annually, we deliver about 230 million tons, and we bring in about 360 billion rubles per annum. Now, as a company, we've invested quite extensively internally. Over the last 7 years, we've spent about 750 billion rubles. That's just in the country alone. And we raised these funds from the debt markets. And these are based on the strength of our own balance sheet. But what we've seen, we've raised this debt capital through local foreign bonds and loans. So our only source of external is the external funding. And from a government point of view, we see that government actually, they guarantee about 3% of our finance. So that's possibly around 14 billion rubles. But I think for me, we've seen more growth in private sector participation that has happened. It forms an opportunity because we're able to increase our capacity and efficiencies through this market. Now, if I look at the African market, what we've seen is there's a huge opportunity in Africa, particularly when you look at the aging infrastructure, when we go across the border from South Africa. Now, within South Africa, we're on the forefront of technology, I think especially heavy oil. Last week, we broke one of the records for having the most wagons on the manganese train. We run about 375 wagons on one train, which is over 4 kilometers long. Now we're trying to take that technology and this experience into Africa. Now what we found is within Africa, the current network, it's in a very poor state. Also the rolling stock. So when we get into these countries, we often have to take our old rolling stock and support these countries. And you'll find that the axle loads, it takes about 18 tons per axle load, which is not suitable for the conditions. So you actually need a light locomotive for Africa. So a lot of our investments is how then do we get into Africa and actually fund these projects that are available. And this is where we're starting to look at these private partnerships to actually enable us to invest.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. And now, for today, we have listened to all the speakers, and now we have some short time for voting. So you've listened to the discussion, and now please, we'll have the QR code in the screen, and please vote. So now we on the stage will also be able to vote. And the question is on the forms of investment. So let's check how this discussion gave food for thought to us regarding the forms of investment into the railway infrastructure. Ten more seconds, and then we'll have the results in the screen. Could you please show the results? So what we have is different traffic concession and green bonds are leading. Other forms of financing are coming after that. And then we have loans, which are well known and clear. So packaging and promoting of concession projects, packaging and presentation to the market or green projects. So this is what you'll need to pay more attention to in the future as a company. And participants of this discussion should be happy because financial institutions and consultants will have work to do. Thank you so much. We are within the schedule and we have even 2 more minutes to get prepared to the next session. Thank you very much. I think it was quite interesting.